Welcome friends. In this video we're going to learn another thing that we can do with connecting web pages to SQL Server. So let's take a look. I'm going to use AdventureWorks for this project. And remember here the following fact that inside AdventureWorks there's a salesperson table. Okay, let's take a look at that. So use the salesperson table. So use AdventureWorks and then go. Let's take a look at the table. So select say star from sales as salesperson. Let's see what we get here. And when you look through this, you've got the business entity ID and so on, and you've got the sales year to date. So for our purposes, all you really want to do is in a web page, as an example, among many other things that you could do, obviously, show the sum of the total sales year to date. We want to be able to add up this value here using a new approach. So how can we go about that? I'm going to show you a whole bunch of new stuff. Take a look. So remember, we're adding up sales year to date. We're going to get that sum. So crank up Visual Studio, and I already have it open. So crank up Visual Studio and make a new web-based project, just of the kind we've done before. And this time, we're going to connect to SQL Server with Visual Studio. So take a look at what I mean here. On the toolbar across the top, go to View, and then SQL Server Object Explorer. Select that node. And if you have to, click that little button that says Add SQL Server. And then from this window, which is very similar to the ones we've used before, if you think about it, it looks a little bit different, but overall it's the same thing. Expand the node that says, for example, local. And then you might have obviously multiple projects. So remember, ours is called this one right here, SQL Express. Down below it's going to give you the usual information, the server name, the authentication, Windows mode, the username, password, that's fine, and the database name. Just make sure you select AdventureWorks 2014, for example, and then click Connect. So it's the usual kind of screen. And when you expand that node that says SQL Server here, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff. You have to be very careful because some of this local DB stuff is not what we are using. You might see that though. So instead, make sure you expand the node that says SQL Express. Expand that node, expand the databases node, and within that, you should see the AdventureWorks database. Okay, I hope you've got that. And what we want to take out of here is the connection string to AdventureWorks. So if you right-click on it and go to its properties, so right-click on AdventureWorks, and you should see a big panel similar to this one open that gives you the properties of AdventureWorks. So one more time, right-click on AdventureWorks and then properties on the bottom. All right, and take that panel, expand it, make it big so it fills the screen. Adjust the size of the columns here. And what we are interested in is the connection string, which is right there. You see that? All right, so then basically double click in that space. It highlights that string for you. And then you can copy and make use of it very easily. See? All right, so on my computer, I'm going to do Control-C to copy it. So Control+C to copy it. Click off that panel now. So it hides away out of view. All right, so just hide the panel one way or another. So you've got this connection string copied. Then now take a look at the next steps. So if you want, you can also close the SQL Server Object Explorer so it's out of the way. We don't need it anymore. So this is what we have here. We've got the connection string in our copy board. And now from the toolbox on the left side, I'm going to add a button. So put a button in there. And then switch over to source view. And this is what you have so far. Just a button control. I'm going to enlarge this maybe 80%. All right, let me get rid of some of the gaps. So it looks as shown here. All right, 75% will be better. Good. So we've got that. And at the next stage here, just make sure that after the button you have a BR so things get stacked vertically when you show them in the page. Okay, we've got that. Under that, add a label. And the label is needed so that you have a place to display some output. And for our purposes, you can leave the ID as label 1, but if you want, you can, for example, call it LBL total year to date sales. So we understand the purpose of that label. It will simply show the total year to date sales that we read from SQL Server. And for the button, change the visible text on it. You can leave the ID as button 1, that's not important for us. Change the visible text, so for example says something like find total year to date sales. Remember, the text is the visible text on the button when the page is actually run. Okay? And then we've got that. So this is what we have so far in terms of a very simple interface. Now what I need to do is create C# code that will connect to SQL Server and retrieve values, and then we'll also use something called LINQ, Language Integrated Query. You'll see how powerful this is. So switch back to design view for a second, and then double click on find total year to date sales, that button. Give it a good solid double click. And that should bring you to the default.aspx.cs file. And from here, first of all, this portion that says page_load can be removed. We don't need that. Just get rid of it so it doesn't clutter our code. Let me pull this down. And this is what we have so far. So here's where we are going to make everything happen, okay? So the first thing is, remember, we need the connection string because that is how we connect to the server. Right before the protected void button under one score click, type string, const string, and then type equals, and then put in the symbol here so we can make a literal or verbatim string, and then put double quotes and then a semicolon. And now between those, paste in the connection string that we copied. So I'll just do Control V, that's it. And if you look through this, make sure that for initial catalog is showing you AdventureWorks. If it doesn't show you that, you might have errors, okay, for the rest of the code. So you want to make sure that I'm going to split this over multiple lines. You can do that because this thing gets kind of messy. It's pretty big, you see that? All right. There you go. That's a little better. If you look through it, it's an old-fashioned connection string we've seen before. Name of computer, name of server. AdventureWorks is the initial database. Correct. Integrated security. Correct. Windows authentication. And then we have some additional highly technical details. You can just leave those as they are. That's all. Okay. So you've got the connection string. So now within the block defined by button1_click, we're going to write some C# as follows. Take a look. First, I'm going to type using, and I'm going to make an SQL connection object. So I'm going to say SQL connection object. And of course, that won't show. And usually the reason is, as you might know, lack of some kind of namespace reference. We need that. So here, take a look. Let's add a namespace reference. I'm going to say using system.data. That's one namespace. And then let's also add using system.data.SQL client. Add those to SQL client and data. And remember, until they are used in the code, they look faded. Once they are used, they turn bold and very crisp and clear. So let's take a look. Let me pull down a little bit. So using SQL, and now I'm going to type SQL connection. And notice that immediately SQL client above gets turns an intense black to indicate that SQL connection essentially resides in SQL client, and that's why SQL client is needed. That's where SQL connection is found, okay? So let's continue here. I'm going to say at the next stage con, and then a new SQL connection. And remember, this object here requires, if you look through it, initializes a new instance of the SQL connection class when given a string that contains the connection string. That's it. So I'm going to type here const string from the one we have above. That's it. That's where we got that. And remember that I'm using the using keyword because the goal is to get the connection made, to use it, and then close it properly so everything is disposed of, okay? And now let's throw in a set of curly braces to define the body of the using here. And within here, I'm going to say SQL command. And now we're going to make the command. So com equals, and then type new SQL command. And for the sake of variety, I'm going to hard code the query that essentially will make the command happen. Take a look. Between double quotes, you can type, as an example, select sales and then year to date. from, and then you can type sales.salesperson, and this also relies on the connection object. So put a comma and then put con, like that. You need both when you use this. Let me zoom out here a little bit. It's a bit too big. Make it 60% so it fits in a single line. There you go. All right, so we're making this SQL command object. Notice it relies on the string that you pass in, that's the query, and then the connection object. Up above, the connection object itself depends on the connection string to the server, okay? So everything fits nicely together like a puzzle. And the next stage, if you remember, we're going to make an adapter. An adapter will then be used to fill out data table. So next time I'm going to type SQL and then data adapter. I'm going to call it adapter naturally enough. And on the right side, I'm going to say new SQL data adapter. And then remember, the adapter is kind of like the intermediate code, so to speak, that uses the command object to populate a data table that we can then make use of, okay? So because it is that, it relies on the command object like that. So you put in COMM for command. All right, good. And remember, if you hover your mouse over new SQL adapter, it's going to give you additional information. It presents a set of data commands and a database connection that I use to fill the data set and update a SQL Server database. So we can use it to fill a data set. So that is what we are going to do next. I'm going to say as follows: data table, DT often is called, and on the right side I will say new data table. So make a new data table object. Keep in mind that this code is being placed in button1_click, which means every time you click it, all of this code will be executed again and again and again. Okay, keep that in mind. You're going to make the new SQL connection, the new command object, the new adapter, the new data table, and so on. And the next stage is continue. So we have our connection string. We use that to make a connection object. The connection object is used to make a command. The command now is used to make an SQL data adapter. And the data adapter can now be used to fill a data table. So I'm going to say the following. I'm going to say adapter and then dot fill and then DT. If you hover your mouse over DT one more time, remember it says represents one table of in-memory data. In-memory data, that's it. So the next stage I'm going to say the most interesting bit here. This code here, to some extent, we have seen many aspects of it already, and now we're going to do something quite different. Take a look. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say var and then total year-to-date sales. And now at the next stage, I am going to use a LINQ or language integrated query to show you how powerful this feature is, okay? So I'm going to take the data table that we have filled with the adapter. I'm going to put a period, and notice all of the options that show on it. One of them is called as enumerable. If you look at the tip that shows, again, it's a bit mysterious, but the point is that it says this object can be used in a LINQ expression or method query. And it says here, returns an enumerable object where the generic parameter t is a data row. This is going to give us essentially data rows. You see that? So we're going to make our data table, and we're going to make it enumerable so we can go through the rows that it contains. To enumerate simply means to list out. That's all. All right, so I'm going to say here dt.asEnumerable, and that's a method, so you put parentheses. And then after that, that's not enough, so I'm going to say dot. And again, a whole set of options shows here. And remember, because we want to sum up the values in the sales year to date, I'm going to say this next. I'm going to say sum. And that's not enough. You got to keep going here. What are we going to sum up? Well, take a look. Look at the tip that shows. It says here, computes the sum of the sequence of nullable decimal values. And you cannot even see the rest of it. That's not really important. What is important, though, is you see this, if you go through it. So for our purposes, what this is going to allow us to do is to grab the data table, and because it's enumerable now, we can go through the rows and add up the values inside the rows. And to accomplish that, I will type row, or whatever you want to type there. It doesn't have to be row, but I use row so we understand the purpose of things. And then you're going to use this symbol right here, the equals with the arrow to the right. And then you're going to act on each row. Take a look. You're going to say row dot, and then after that, you're going to type field. And if you look at this, you see what it says? Provides strongly typed access to each of the column values in a specified row. Regardless of how complicated this seems on your calculator, this is like saying you're grabbing a column and you go through the row entries and you just add them up on your calculator, right? One at a time. That's what this code is doing here, even though it seems very, much more complicated than that. That's all it's really doing. And it says provides strongly typed access to each of the column values in a specified row. Strongly typed means the following, that once you have this word written in here, field, you got to put this kind of thing right there. You see that? And then you got to specify the data type. So I'm going to put decimal in here. That's what we mean by strongly typed. You specify a specific data type, like decimal, for example. Remember that in our data table there in SQL Server, if you look at this, take a look. Go back there for a second. I'll make sure we connect the two. So let me go back there, take a look. I'm going to type ASP underscore columns and then name of table. So salesperson. All right, give that a go here. Execute that. Remember, this is a stored procedure. It should already be in SQL Server. It allows you to look at the columns and the data types for each table that you have. So for this quantity, sales year to date, the data type is money, as you can see. You see? So that's why here I'm putting decimal. In SQL Server, it's money, and here it's decimal. And if you hover your mouse over it, it's going to show you a whole big message like this. Let's just continue here. And after that, at the last stage here, take a look. It says the following. You've got decimal, data row dot field, and then the decimal between the little arrows that point left and right. That's the data type, and then string column name. So this is how you reference the column name in SQL Server. That's what you're doing here, okay? I'm going to say the following. I will say sales year to date, like that. And then make sure you terminate all of this with a semicolon. But this is definitely the most interesting line in this whole video. I'm going to zoom in on it for a second and make sure we understand what we're doing here. So remember, you're taking the data table object, you're making it enumerable so you can step through its rows. And then you're going to hit it with the sum function. And the sum basically will take each row. And then you're going to do the field, which is the decimal data type. And specifically, you're going to do that within the sales year-to-date column, okay? So you're going to go through the year-to-date column, row by row by row, and add up those values. That's what it's doing in simple English. That's it. All right. And let's see here. Make sure you've got the parentheses as shown here. Okay. At the next stage, we got to clean up the top. So right-click there and then remove and sort using. Get rid of some of the ones that we don't need. So right-click and then remove and sort usings. Let me zoom back out so you can see most of the code again. This is pretty much it. This is the whole code. I'm going to pull this curly brace up one line, and I want to also pull this up one line. And the last stage, remember, so we've got this value that is the total year-to-date sales. Now we've got to display it in the label at the next stage. So to do that, type the following, LBL, and then total year-to-date sales dot text, and just set that equal to some meaningful text. So for example, total year-to-date sales, and then plus, and then that variable. So total year-to-date sales, like that. Remember, take a look. When sum operates, hover your mouse over sum. And when it operates, despite the apparent complexity of everything, over here, you see where it says decimal? After extension, it says decimal. That means the result of using the sum function is a decimal. When you add values on your calculator, you get another number out, not a table or something like that, correct? Same principle here. The decimal after the extension tells you sum will operate on the rows, add them up, and produce one numerical quantity of the decimal data type. All right, so we've got this code ready. Let's give it a go. So hit Google Chrome, give it a second to load. It will spin its wheels at first, as you can imagine, but you just have to be patient. All right, and let me expand the view here so it's bigger. All right, and then I will just click on find total year-to-date sales, give it a second here, and it says total year-to-date sales is equal to that number. Obviously, that will have to be formatted to make it look more professional. And you've got to add a space after the sales, right? So it's not crunched together like that. Let me close that, just exit off the screen. All right, so put a little thing like that. And then after that, the only part that really remains is the formatting. And again, you can do this in a variety of ways. And one way that you can format is as follows. Instead of using this business here that I've highlighted in the blue box, you can do this instead. Type string.format and then put in the quantity you want to format. It says string and then format. So put, for example, total year-to-date sales, and then put, say, a colon with some space. Obviously, the brown stuff that you see is stuff that you make up. You can put in whatever you want there, okay? But then put a placeholder. That means you put something like that. That's a placeholder right there. And the 0 means it's index 0. And then to make sure it gets displayed as currency, after it, put a colon and a C. So let's be very clear here. This business right there I've highlighted, that has to be in that specific format. The stuff before it that I'm highlighting now, that's just you, whatever you make up. That's up to you, okay? And then put a comma, and then a variable that you want to stick into the 0:C at runtime. So I'm going to say total year-to-date sales, like that, and terminate this with a semicolon. Let's give it a go on Google Chrome. So hit Google Chrome. All right, and then just hit find total year-to-date sales, and now it's nicely formatted as currency, as you can see. And it's got a nice space, so it looks much more professional. Let me close this. Okay, friends, I'm going to leave it here. This is all of the code, basically, from top to bottom. Let me just, there you go, from top to bottom, this is the code in its cleanest form. And remember that our page here consists of this. This is the HTML with the ASP markup also included for the button and the label. And remember, again, when you're doing this, to make it work properly, make sure that at the top you have the correct namespaces. All right, I'm going to leave it here.